Jake Tate ignored an onslaught of bizarre growths until a crisis forced him to face the horrifying truth. In August of 2006, 20-year-old Jake Tate, a one-time star basketball player, was focused on winning something bigger than a game. The girl of his dreams.
Heidi and I met at a restaurant we were both working at in Knoxville. I knew she was the one.
Jake was very athletic. He's a very good-looking guy. He's 6'6", and he has one of the most determined, hardworking natures, and he won't let anything stand in his way.
I asked to take her to dinner after work, and she introduced me to her son, Benjamin.
And when I saw how sweet he was with Ben, it was just immediate.
Heidi and I dated for 9 months before I proposed. We got married in Vegas on May 29th.
And almost as soon as they return from their honeymoon, Jake makes a momentous decision.
I knew that I had to have a better job to support my wife and child. So in June in 07, I decided to join the Air Force to do tech school for meteorology. After basic training, I was stationed in Biloxi, Mississippi. It's kind of like really strict college. You go to class every day and you learn how to forecast meteorology. To think that you complete 2 years of college in 8.5 months is pretty crazy. I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get ready for school, and the day ends about 3 o'clock. And then you do PT till about 6. It's constant physical and mental strain.
Over the next several months, Jake slowly adapts to the demanding routine. He has no clue that his life is about to spin out of control.
I was in the shower and I noticed that I had a small lump that was the size of an eraser on a number 2 pencil. It was protruding from the right side of my abdomen. I thought maybe I hurt myself exercising. I just kind of thought it'll go away.
Putting the strange growth out of his mind, Jake throws himself into the training program harder than ever. But over the next month, a dozen more lumps begin to form on his abdomen.
The lumps were kind of like small marbles underneath my skin. If I just kind of put my finger on one, put a little pressure behind it, that caused me a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain.
I first noticed that there was something wrong with Jake when he was rubbing his side and making a face. And I could feel that there was definitely a hard knot underneath the skin. Almost felt like a cyst of some kind.
I thought, well, can't be that big a deal. It's probably stress or something, because this is the most stress that I'd ever felt in my life. And I just didn't really want to go to the doctor.
But as winter drags on, more and more painful lumps appear at an alarming rate.
By that time, I probably had about 40 lumps. To cope with the pain, I started using a heating pad at night. I also would take hot showers and hot baths, and it really helped.
It was important to me that Jake seek medical help because at this point it was obvious that this was something that wasn't normal.
I really just didn't want to go to the doctor, and I was going to continue to do what I'd been doing, ignore them, because I was still so young and new in the Air Force, and I was afraid that something like this could possibly get me kicked out.
Determined to maintain his status in the Air Force, Jake focuses on his studies, and in the spring, he graduates with flying colors. Soon after, he lands his first military assignment.
I moved to South Carolina to Shaw Air Force Base to start my job as a meteorologist.
When we initially got to South Carolina, there seemed to be a pause in the symptoms.
It was a lot more warm and dry in South Carolina. The heat and the lack of humidity and the lack of stress as I had learned my job and I was doing well at it. And so I started feeling a lot better. The lumps would become smaller in size and they would hurt less.
We thought maybe it was just going to take care of itself at this point.
As the lumps seemed to shrink with each passing day, Jake and Heidi breathe a huge sigh of relief. Unfortunately, the reprieve is short-lived.
In late October, early November, I was getting more lumps on my back, my thighs, and my abdomen.
These symptoms that he was having came back as strong as they had ever been before we left, and for the most part worse.
At this point, we actually started counting. Heidi and I would go through and take a highlighter and mark each lump. I've had about 60 of them. The hurt was like a stabbing sensation.
He was in such extreme pain that he was almost in tears, and that's just not my husband.
There were some times when I would be in so much pain that I would literally vomit. I would start throwing up because I hurt so bad.
He was withdrawing himself from the family, and he was short with us, whereas he would never have been that way before. I suggested that Jay go see a doctor. I was pushing him to go. But Jake was in complete denial about it, and he didn't want to think about it. He didn't want to talk about it.
I really didn't want the Air Force to find out. I was afraid that they would take away my job. I was afraid that I would get in trouble at this point because I'd kept it quiet so long. And there's not like you wake up overnight and have so many lumps.
At this point, our lives and his life had been totally turned upside down. He needed to go to the doctor.
Over the last year, strange lumps have been growing rapidly all over Jake Tate's body, but he still hasn't seen a doctor. Afraid that a medical problem will disqualify him from his Air Force job, Jake is determined to live stoically with the mysterious, painful disease. But it just keeps getting worse.
My lumps seemed to hurt more. They started getting extremely painful.
I was pushing him to see a doctor. I threatened him and told him that I was going to go and tell his supervisor.
And so I decided it would be best to go ahead and go to the doctor.
In the winter, almost a year from when the first lump appeared, Jake finally schedules an appointment off base.
When I went to see the dermatologist, I had 156 lumps. I said, I can't live with this any longer. And I explained to him, anytime I put pressure on him, I'm in excruciating pain. He said that he had never seen this many lumps on one person. He was shocked. The dermatologist told me that the best idea would be to biopsy him, just to make sure that there was nothing else going on. And I thought, you know, maybe it could be some kind of cancer.
I thought about my husband and whether or not we're going to be able to be 70 years old and walking down the street together. But I had to put those kinds of thoughts out of my head because it can devastate you.
Finally, after an anxious 48 hours, the test results are in.
He could tell that it was non-cancerous.
It was an overwhelming relief.
And he told me they were lipomas.
Lipomas are fatty lumps. They are usually not painful, and their cause is unknown.
The dermatologist said they're not really sure why they form, but if they're irritating you, then we can start cutting them out. And if we do them in 2-week increments, it shouldn't take us more than a year to get all of these out. It seemed like a dream come true that this guy could solve my problem so easily. So I was gung-ho. I went back the next week, and then he proceeded to give me a local anesthetic around the area. We cut 2 out that day.
We were hopeful that everything was going to be easy and life would go back to normal.
But just when Jake thinks he has things under control, he goes in for a follow-up visit and finds himself blindsided by a horrifying new development.
The spot where he had taken out the first 2, there was about 4 to 5 lipomas, or lumps, where the 2 original had been. They were multiplying. It was like a piece of popcorn, where it's just a bunch of little bulbs sticking out off the sides.
We were shocked as to what was going on and why it had happened right in that same spot. Jake seemed very disheartened and frustrated.
At that point, I asked if there was another treatment that I could look into. Since they were growing back faster than he could cut them out, he said that what I might try is liposuction.
Determined to leave no stone unturned, Jake and Heidi immediately set up an appointment with a plastic surgeon.
The plastic surgeon did a thorough exam and said that I did have a lot of lipomas. It wasn't something he had seen before, but it was pretty rare to have that many that were causing pain.
The plastic surgeon told us there was absolutely no way that liposuction would work. That if they were multiplying from having them removed, that it would only be worse with liposuction. He basically said that there was nothing that he could do for him. When Jake left, he was devastated. The weight that we thought was going to be lifted was 10 times worse because now we didn't know what we were going to do.
I was in a lot of pain constantly, and things were only getting worse.
And I said to him that maybe we should make another appointment to go see the doctor on base. And so that's when he went and he met with Dr. Judy.
When I first saw Jake, he was scared, overwhelmed, and a little despondent. He was looking for answers. I took a history, and then one by one, he showed me where he had these painful lumps.
When I saw Dr. Judy, I had about 200 lipomas.
Jake had lipomas all over his body, from his arms to his chest, to his abdomen, to his legs, on his back. And they would range in size from a pea all the way up to a golf ball. I was overwhelmed. I'd never seen anything like it before.
Over the last year, more than 200 agonizing lumps have surfaced on Jake Tate's body, and no doctor can explain what's wrong with him. Now he's in the hands of Dr. Carrie Judy, who is completely shocked by what she's seen.
Never in my life had I seen a patient with that many lipomas before. Anytime I would touch any of his lipomas, he would wince, and I wasn't honestly quite sure what to do. I was very concerned because I knew that Jake was active duty military, and you have to be fit to fight, and I knew this would impact his career if there wasn't a cure.
But before she can deal with Jake's future, Dr. Judy needs to get his pain under control.
She prescribed him pain medication that helped him feel better.
And I tried to find out if there was anybody that knew more about it than I did.
After leaving Dr. Judy, I was definitely a lot more positive.
Over the next 2 weeks, she spends countless hours trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And now, Dr. Judy thinks she may have found an expert who can answer all of their questions. Dr. Karen Herbst.
She actually specializes in fatty disorders, things that are a little bit rare and a little bit more difficult to treat.
We scheduled an opportunity for me to meet with Dr. Herbst. That was a great feeling. Dr. Herbst did a full body exam. She went over every lipoma and checked me out from head to toe.
When I examined his trunk, he was exquisitely tender. When I would touch him, he would wince and shift his body. Based on Jake's painful lipomas, I gave him a diagnosis of Dercum's disease.
Dercum's disease is a rare disorder in which the body forms acutely painful lipomas. In a healthy individual, small amounts of fluid containing toxins continually leak from blood vessels and are easily flushed out of the body. But in patients like Jake, for some unknown reason, too much fluid is released and settles between cells, creating inflammation. To clean up the toxic fluid, the body sends blood cells to the rescue. And to feed those cells, it produces fat, which gradually builds up into solid growths.
If you have a vessel that leaks fluid, that fluid should normally leave, but if it doesn't, then it's going to sit in that area and stay. It's like you take the garbage out to the street, but it never gets picked up by the garbage truck. So it starts to almost ferment in the tissue. It becomes more and more toxic, and it sends signals out to cells called macrophages to come in and clean up the mess. They eat up all of the garbage that's in the tissue. These macrophages need to have food themselves. So the fat in the areas of the lipoma most likely grows in order to feed the cells that have accumulated in that tissue itself.
My gut reaction to finding out that I actually had Dercum's disease was to jump up and cheer. I was really happy that I found out what was wrong with me.
I thought about where we were going to go from here. I was hopeful for the future,
While much about Dercums is a mystery, Dr. Herbst is one of the world's foremost experts on it, and she suspects that Jake may be genetically predisposed to the disease.
My understanding is likely there's been a mutation in a gene that's passed down amongst family members, and that causes the blood vessels and fat tissue to respond differently to inflammation.
Dr. Herbst also has a theory about what triggered the onset of Dercums in Jake's case.
He had just undergone boot camp, and an extreme amount of physical activity. When you undergo physical activity, you produce a lot of lactic acid, and then it's taken to the liver and it's metabolized. Well, in someone who has Dercum's disease, the lactic acid is released outside of the cell, but then it just sits there.
And the more Jake exercised, the worse his symptoms became. But surprisingly, they improved during the hot summer in South Carolina.
The heat probably helps Jake because it dilates the blood vessels, and dilation actually draws more fluid from the tissue back into the blood vessels, and it gives a little bit of relief to the nerves during that period of time.
But even physicians on the cutting edge of research like Dr. Herbst don't understand why Dercums is so painful. However, she can explain why the lipomas multiplied when Jake had them surgically excised.
When you remove the lipoma, you leave behind an area of inflammation. Whenever there's inflammation, there's an over-responsiveness of the body. Inflammation in the area of surgery stimulates leakage and fluid to accumulate. So having lipomas removed in Dercum's disease causes a vicious cycle of growth of fat.
Despite the harsh reality of the disease, Jake is aware that his prognosis would have been dire if he hadn't been diagnosed when he was.
The worst case scenario with Dercum's disease is somebody who is unable to handle the excess amount of fluid in their body. So as the fluid builds up over time, it also fills up in the lung, and that can actually lead to death.
The grim truth is there's no medication that can shrink the lipomas, and no surgery that will permanently remove them.
Unfortunately, there is no cure for Dercum's disease.
This is a lifelong problem, so these should continue to grow over time.
When the realization hit that Jake was going to have to live with this disease for the rest of his life, and that the lumps were going to continue to multiply, it's devastating.
I wanted to cry because I knew that this was going to be a long, hard battle.
But Dr. Herbst also has some good news for Jake and Heidi. There are ways that they can manage the symptoms.
I can make a number of recommendations to possibly decrease some of the fluid in his tissue and enable Jake to have as long of a life as somebody who doesn't have Dercum's disease. He should avoid physical activity, and he needs to decrease the amount of stress in his life.
He has to change every aspect of his life.
While Jake is grateful to finally know how to cope with his devastating condition, he can't help but wonder why no other doctor was able to give him a solid diagnosis.
We really don't receive education on how to diagnose fat disorders. A doctor would look at it and say, you have multiple lipomas, don't worry about it, go on home.
Today, Jake is bravely living with his condition. Unfortunately, he may have to give up the job that has meant so much to him.
I really don't want to leave the Air Force, but I'm not able to do all the physical things that I was before.
Jake's case is currently under medical review to determine whether or not he'll be able to continue serving in the military. In the meantime, Jake and Heidi are focused on raising their family. They now have 2 children.
It's really important to me to be a role model for my kids. As a father, my sons especially look up to me.
I know that this is something that is going to be with us forever, and I really hate that for him.
My wife and I recently just counted again. I'm up to 815 lipomas now. Currently, I'm taking 2 different kinds of pain medicine. It helps me be able to perform everyday tasks like pick my kid up. And so the medications have definitely helped with stuff like that.
Despite the uncertainties they face, Jake and Heidi are closer than ever.
Everything that's happened has made our marriage so much stronger, and it made me love him so much more.
I had learned all